Right here, if we look at the amount of time we have left, we have 0.1 seconds left on our PvP badge. We have 0.3 seconds left on Combustion. Berserking is about to end. We've got 2 stacks of Infernal Cascade, 5 stacks of Fever Incantation. This right here, count them out, 8 Pyroblast in 1 Combustion. What's up, guys? This is Preheat, World First Raider in Complexity Limit and Wowhead Guide Rider, and today we are revisiting Fire. So if you watched my older video about Fire, I want to update you on a couple things. Blizzard has changed the class. They literally did it a couple hours after I released my Fire video. There is information in there in the comments to try and correct some of the information, but I figured I would just redo the video to basically cover all the new stuff that we've actually learned. So I actually have a ton of insights now that I've been raiding and doing Mythic Plus, and I want to share that information with you, and we'll get to that in just a bit. In this guide, I'll be covering best covenants, best conduits, soulbinds, legendaries, trinkets, stats, talents, cooldowns, and rotation. All this is going to be up to date as of us clearing the raid world first once again. We have a lot to talk about, so let's get started. We no longer shifting power single target in Combustion. Don't do that anymore. You still do it in AoE. We'll get to that in a bit. But for now, let's just focus on just the general stuff that needs to be changed here. Night Fae is the best covenant for Fire Mages, generally speaking. Now, there are different covenants that might be better at certain Soulbind levels, certain Renown levels. Just go Night Fae if you want to play Fire. You can play the other covenants if you want to. If it's like a big deal to you and you just really, really love the other covenants, it's fine. But if you're serious about Fire Mage, I honestly think you should just consider going Night Fae. It's really not that bad to swap to if you're a different covenant. Shifting Power is a fantastic ability for Fire Mages since it offers cooldown reduction, and Fire Mages have a lot of cooldowns. Bunch of short cooldowns such as Fire Blast, Phoenix Flames, Rune of Power, Dragon's Breath, Combustion. It's huge, right? We basically always have our cooldowns up. And another benefit of going Night Fae is that we gain access to Discipline of the Grove, which is a very, very solid second conduit now that we have that unlocked as of, I think, last week. Basically, it's a trade that you can just keep slotted in regardless of whatever content you're doing. And it's going to be good for AoE, and it's going to be good in single target as well. Night Fae Fire Mages also can use Soul Shape, which is like the best ability ever. You basically become like the spirit animal and you run around really fast and you can teleport around. It's movement speed increase with a built-in teleport. Amazing mobility tool. Fire already has really, really good mobility with Shimmer, Blink, Scorch, Frenetic Speed, but more mobility is always good, guys. So just, you know, it's another benefit to Night Fae. For Soulbinds, Dreamweaver is extremely early when it comes to a second potency slot. That's going to be at Renown 13, which I think all of us should be at now. It's pretty easy to catch up to if you're not quite there yet. But this coupled with a cheat death with Pod Tender, very, very strong talent, basically makes Dreamweaver the ultimate progression Soulbind. Night Fae is the ultimate covenant for Fire Mages. So there are other Soulbinds as well. You can go Nia, you can go Coraline. That's fine. Those are backup options, right? They're also very strong, but I definitely recommend going Dreamweaver for the most part here. As far as other covenants, they're okay, but like I said, if you're serious about Fire, you should pick Night Fae. It is just the best one to go with, okay? For conduits, Infernal Cascade is extremely strong and is always going to be slotted in. Basically, this is just Blaster Master from BFA, but it's a little bit easier to play around. It only stacks twice now. Discipline of the Grove is going to be a strong second one for Mythic Plus, for raiding, for any time that you're using Combustion on cooldown. And if you're Night Fae and you don't want to have to bother swapping around for like Mythic Plus or raiding, going, you know, Control Destruction versus Master Flame, then definitely just stick with Discipline of the Grove. Very, very strong second conduit there. Control Destruction and Master Flame are just basically just boring damage increases. There's nothing all that interesting about them, but they are still very strong, especially Master Flame. If you're holding your Combustion very, very often, you're just holding onto your Combustion, waiting for a very specific time to use it, then it might be better in single target to go Control Destruction or in raids, and then maybe in Mythic Plus Master Flame. I think Master Flame actually gains a lot of value in Mythic Plus, and I've done a bunch of Mythic Plus with it. It's more of kind of a judgment call, I think, when it comes to Mythic Plus. When it comes to the other conduits, Flow of Time is very strong. It affects Shimmer. There's also the one that affects your counterspell whenever you successfully interrupt with that. Cryo Freeze is a defensive one that basically gives you a heal whenever you ice block, which is great for solo content. The other conduits I didn't mention, those can all be found on my Wowhead guide and also my previous video if you want to hear more about those. I'm not going to focus on those too much. But for conduits, basically, you want to just always have, you got to always have Infernal Cascade. Like, this is not optional. You have to have this one. And then for a second one, you're either going to have Discipline of the Grove, Control Destruction, or Master Flame. And it just depends on whatever content you're doing. And I guess like how your tank is pulling and what your push times are in how you're using Combustion. That's really kind of where there's a little bit of uncertainty about which one you should go. As far as legendaries go, Fire Mage legendaries are pretty interesting, but I want to focus on the main ones. So Disciplinary Command is the one that people always like to talk about because it seems very, very high. And I guess it is technically the best for single target, but I think it's kind of a bait. Yeah, it's like very, very slightly ahead, like very, very small. We're talking like less than probably 1% in single target, but it immediately falls behind in AoE. I don't recommend that you craft this unless you already have Fevered Incantation crafted. Just don't worry about a Disciplinary Command unless you already have other good legendaries, because it's a very niche legendary. I could see it being very, very strong on like Sludge Fist, for instance, but otherwise, I don't really recommend going this legendary. Fevered Incantation is the one I recommend. If you are playing Fire Mage right now, you should go and craft Fevered Incantation. It comes from a world boss, so you might have to wait another rotation or two to get it. And in that time, you maybe go Firestorm while you wait. But this is what you should craft for the best damage. It's simple. Basically, you just get damage whenever you crit. It may not seem much. It may seem like RNG, but there's actually something cool about this. So if you think about it, in order to get to a hot streak, right, you have to crit twice, which means you're always going to have 2 stacks of Fevered Incantation whenever you Pyroblast. And if that Pyroblast crits, then great, you get the benefit of it, and it goes up to 3 stacks. But yeah, this comes from the Ardenwald world boss. The name is Orobos. And this legendary is especially strong as we get more geared, because one of the other benefits of the legendary is it makes our crit stat go way, way, way through the roof. It doesn't make crit like our best stat or anything, but it makes it not our worst stat. It basically brings it up to the level of all of our other stats, making crit a very, very strong stat. I recommend if you're making Fevered Incantation that you make it on the headpiece and you make it with crit and haste. That is my recommendation just across the board, because at the very, very end game for how you want to gear your character right, like the perfect setup, you're going to eventually want it to be haste crit just because that's what is BiS, right? But obviously you can choose whatever secondaries you want. Feel free to sim your character if that's what you want to do to figure out what's best for you. But yeah, definitely make sure that you hit up this world boss and you get Incantation. It's very, very important. For other legendaries, Firestorm is a very, very fun legendary to play around. It basically gives you like Machine Gun, Flame Strike, Pyroblast. It's a pretty cool legendary, but it is a little bit RNG. The other thing about this is if you play Firestorm, you're going to want to convert all of your heating ups to hot streaks at like the very, very end of your cast, because if you don't, you're just going to lose damage, right? So it's based on the generation of hot streak, not the consumption. So if you start casting a fireball and you have a heating up and you just press your fire blast right away, guess what? You're going to lose a couple seconds of the proc, right? Because you basically you're just stuck casting fireball. It's not ideal at all. If you ever catch yourself in that situation and it's very early in the cast and you have quick reaction time, definitely just break out of it and immediately start pyroblasting. But you know, if you're not able to get it right away, I recommend just following through with whatever you're casting and then continue to cast those pyroblasts. You know, always be casting, basically. So yeah, that's the other issue with it. Basically, it's not quite as good as Fevered Incantation, but there are other reasons why this legendary is worth looking into. So one of them is that it actually gives you more CDR, which is cooldown reduction, than Fevered Incantation. So if you're doing a fight like Sludge Fist, for instance, right, and you want to make sure that you're combusting every pillar, but you also want to combust the pole, and you aren't quite there with Discipline of the Grove, what you can do is maybe swap to Firestorm. And then in most pulls, you're probably going to have at least 1 proc per minute, right? So it's going to end up giving you about 6 or so seconds of cooldown reduction. And that might help you out to get your combustion to line up just the way that you need it to. So yeah, that's the other benefit of Firestorm, is it gives you a little bit of cooldown reduction, which is great. Both of the legendaries, both Fevered Incantation and Firestorm, both gain value in execute because you're basically getting a lot more crits and you're also generating a lot more hot streaks. So they're both excellent picks. I definitely recommend both of them. But if you're going to pick just one for now, I recommend starting with Fevered Incantation and maybe make Firestorm later if you want to, you know, try that one out. I definitely recommend trying it out, though. It's very fun. As far as other legendaries go, Temporal Warp is another fun one to use. It basically gives you like your own personal lust, but there are some issues with it as well. So obviously, if you're using this legendary, someone else has to provide the Bloodlust. You can't be the guy giving Bloodlust or else it's scuffed, right? Because you're going to basically be wasting your legendary. It's like you aren't even wearing one. So someone else has to be giving you Bloodlust. Also, it loses a lot of value if you are not using this on the pull. So it's only really going to be really beefy on those kind of fights where you lust immediately as soon as you pull the boss, and then you're able to give yourself your own lust. So yeah, just to go over the specific situations where Temporal Warp is going to be best, especially in AoE, it's going to be you have to be Night Fae, obviously. because of the cooldown reduction. Someone else has to be providing Bloodlust for you, right, on the pull. And you have to be able to use Time Warp as you please. Also, I recommend this legendary only really whenever you have like a kill time or like a dungeon where you're able to get multiple uses of Time Warp off. That way you can make the most of this legendary. So it is a little bit fight dependent as well in terms of like how long the fight should last. Overall, I'd say this is also a very niche legendary. It can probably shine really brightly in certain situations, but I think overall, just stick with Fevered Incantation if you have access to it, and if you don't, maybe just craft a Firestorm to hold you over in the meantime. For talents, I recommend this setup. So basically, you're going to have Searing Touch, Shimmer, Rune of Power, Flame On, Frenetic Speed, Conflagration, or Flame Patch, and then Kindling for your last talents. And I don't change anything here at all, except for I change Conflagration to Flame Patch whenever it's anything where I'm going to be casting Flame Strike, right? So if you're ever in a situation where there's a 2-target and you want to hit both of those targets instead of just prioritizing damage in one target, I definitely recommend picking up Flame Patch. Otherwise, just stick with Conflagration and call it a day. You don't really swap talents that much as a Fire Mage, so just kind of stick with this setup and it should do you pretty well. The only other thing I would say is maybe in some cases, there is a reason to go Fire Starter. In some cases, it is worth it to go Fire Starter since you can basically delay your combustion and get a little bit of damage built up. I only really recommend this if you're going with the Imperial Ordnance Trinket, which is basically the trinket where it allows you to use double on use, but you have to kind of idle for about 15 to 18 seconds before you combust. So yeah, for talents, just swap to Flame Patch for AoE, call it a day. Whenever it comes to stats, so stats are always kind of a weird thing to talk about because every character is different, and I always recommend that you just sim your own character, right? But I'm going to give you kind of an idea of what my stats look like. So if we head on over to Bloody Mallet, they've actually done a really good job of kind of mapping out what your stat weights will look like eventually. And this is based off of the tier 26 Fire Mage profile. So if you're wondering kind of like how your stat distributions work, basically how this graph works is the more red it is, the better the damage is. And if you look at other nodes around here, you'll see how close they were to the initial one. And as you can see here, all of these dots are pretty much within 1% or close to 1%. Even just a fraction of a percent to whatever is quote unquote BiS, right? So there's actually a lot of different ways to get to like the ideal stats. You don't need to have a certain like stat setup. There are different ways to get to the ideal damage. You can go all in on haste. You can also have more of a crit and haste kind of blended together build. It really doesn't matter. All that matters is that you just have very high intellect as long as you have Fevered Incantation, because Fevered Incantation greatly increases the value of your crit, basically putting it right in line with all your other stats. So all your stats are going to be good if you've got Fevered Incantation. You just want to have basically as much int as possible, but obviously sim your character to make the slight adjustments that you need to make sure that your character is always doing the most damage that it could possibly be doing. All right, so let's talk about trinkets. A lot of the raid trinkets are good. Soul Igniter is a very strange one. We're going to talk about that in just a second, but obviously Dreadfire Vessel is another one that's really great. These two are fantastic because they do fire damage, and even though all the other trinkets don't really benefit from your damage increases, right? These trinkets actually do. So it's because of the Conduit Infernal Cascade. Basically, you get 2 stacks of this, and the trinkets benefit from that Infernal Cascade, which is fantastic. Makes them stronger. A maxed out PvP badge, though, if you're able to hit like 1800 or 2100, is going to be slightly behind the Dreadfire Vessel at Mythic item level. But if you think about that, like, that's Mythic sire than Atreus, right? Like, that's like a boss that's like the end boss, right? And you have to get the trinket to drop too, which is unlikely. So I definitely recommend make this PvP trinket right away. Why? Because it's basically free. You can just make it. It's guaranteed. You don't have to wait on the boss to drop it or any of that crap. Just go PvP, get this trinket, and it's very strong. And basically, you can just stick with this trinket until you luck into a mythic Dreadfire Vessel, however long it takes you to find that trinket. For the other one, Soul Igniter is a strong option. It's an on-use trinket. So basically, it is like this weird trinket where you activate it and it gives you a buff, and then you use the buff and it spins it and it puts the trinket on cooldown. Now, activating this trinket will put your other trinkets on cooldown. It will give them all a 30-second cooldown. But activating another trinket will not give the Soul Igniter a cooldown. So what you want to do is you want to use your PvP badge or your Dreadfire or whatever it is, basically your other unused trinket first. And then after that, you want to use the Soul Igniter, and it's actually worth it to just instantly cancel it. Even though it has like this whole 15-second rev up where it does more damage, don't even worry about that. The cooldown starts when you actually get rid of the buff, right? And that extra cooldown, that extra 15 seconds of cooldown is not worth desyncing it from everything else. It's not worth desyncing it from Combustion. So just cancel it immediately. That way you can get the most damage out of it. And that way the trinket stays at a 1-minute cooldown. If you want a macro, I will be including it in the description below. I also wrote about this at length in my Wowhead guide. So if you need that information, the link will also be in the description there if you want to read my write-up on this trinket. If you're using this trinket in Mythic Plus, all I can really say is just be really careful with it. It has a tendency to pull things through the roof. Sometimes you'll just randomly hit mobs that are like 100 yards above you. So yeah, I don't recommend this trinket in Mythic Plus, but in Raid it actually does pretty well. So, you know, figure it out for yourself. See if this trinket's something you like. It may not be worth the extra damage, right? It may not be worth the extra hassle, but it is a pretty cool trinket to look into. Okay, so you know how to build your Fire Mage, but how do you play it? So I have other guides that go basically into the same detail, but I'm going to cover it all again. Fire's rotation is all about generating hot streaks. You want to get the most out of your hot streaks, and you want to get the most out of your combustion. Those are like the two main things that you want to focus on. So basically, if you get a crit, you get a heating up, and then once you get another crit, then that heating up converts into a hot streak. Now you don't have to RNG this because you have a move called Fire Blast, which is basically an off the GCD cooldown. You can cast it while casting. Move, you have 3 charges of it, and you use it to basically get a crit, a guaranteed crit, which then converts your hot streak, or sorry, your heating up into a hot streak. That hot streak makes the next Pyroblast or Flame Strike instant cast, and it also doubles its ignite damage. So this is like the super duper basics, right? Hopefully all of you already know how this works. You basically just cast fireballs until you get a crit, and then you use Fire Blast, and then you turn that heating up into a hot streak, and then you cast the Pyroblast, right? Super simple stuff. Just fireball, fireball, fireball. You get a crit, Fire Blast, Pyroblast, right? Okay, so we have more tools than just that. You have something called Critical Mass, which is basically like a flat 15% critical strike, rating boost, and it also boosts how much you get from other sources, which is great. If Fireball doesn't crit, you also get a buff called Fireball that increases the crit chance of your next Fireball by 10%. And you also have talents like Fire Starter and Searing Touch, which basically guarantee crits as well. This is the reason why historically crit has been bad for Fire Mages, unless you can just get to like 100% of it. Because you just have like so much crit just baked into the spec, right? But obviously if you have Fevered Incantation, then suddenly that actually becomes a good thing. And it does make your crit actually worth stacking just a little bit there. So the cooldown for Fire Mages is called Combustion. It gives us 100% crit chance, and it basically lets us just rapid fire spells off because we're just critting every spell. This is what you want to save all of your charges of Phoenix Flame and Fire Blast for. It's basically how the Fire Mage deals damage, right? So if you're wondering, why is my damage so low outside of Combustion? Why is the class like this? Basically, you're just a very bursty class, right? This is the nature of Fire Mage. You're just a very bursty caster. Almost all of your damage is going to come from inside of your Combustion. So managing your combusting well, combusting properly, is the most important thing to focus on, okay? Now, I do have another video that basically covers this, and it also has information about like a macro that you can use as kind of training wheels if you want to get used to this. But I recommend that you just get good at manually combusting. It's a very, very important skill to have as a Fire Mage, and I definitely recommend like practicing your open air a lot and basically getting it to be like second nature to you. If you can get to where your open air is just second nature, that's the biggest step to becoming a good Fire Mage, basically. So let's talk about the open air. On the open air, we want to precast Pyroblast, okay? And then basically we want it to line up so that the Pyroblast makes contact with the target right as the pull timer ends. Now you can actually complete the Pyroblast cast before the timer ends. Just make sure that you're far enough away so that the Pyroblast, doesn't hit the boss early, and then you pull early, and then everyone's mad at you for pulling early. So basically what you want to do is precast a Pyroblast, and then you want to queue up a Fireball. Now, depending on what the first cast does, there's actually kind of a branch here, okay? I'm going to give you like the overall idea. So the general idea is, in Combustion, you want to alternate between casting filler spell, either Fire Blast, Phoenix Flames, Scorch, whatever it is, right? And Pyroblast. Basically, you would just want to be getting off as many Pyroblasts as possible, but you also want to maintain 2 stacks of Infernal Cascade. This is our conduit that we were talking about before that I said isn't optional. This conduit's like way too good, okay? So basically, you want to maintain your 2 charges of, your 2 stacks of Infernal Cascade while getting as many Pyroblasts off as possible in that 12-second combustion window, okay? So, we precast the Pyroblast before the pull. We queue up the Fireball. Now, during the Fireball cast, if your first Pyroblast crit, you need to have, you're going to use 1 Fire Blast after you combust, And if it didn't crit, then you're going to use 2. Because what we need to do is we need to generate a hot streak before the fireball ends. This is very, very important. A lot of people get confused on this, right? And they say, why is it that you're able to cast 2 Pyroblasts in a row? This doesn't make sense, right? Where are you generating the hot streak? How are you able to cast 2 Pyroblasts in a row? Well, it's because the fireball and the Pyroblast that you're going to cast as your first like combination of spells, since you're queuing up the Pyroblast with the fireball, both of those are going to fly off at the same time, and they're both going to crit at the same time. So basically, the opener looks like this: fireball, and then mid cast you cast Combustion, right? And then you're going to Fire Blast either once or twice, depending on if you crit the first time, right? Just to generate the hot streak. You just want to get the hot streak. And then you're queuing up a Pyroblast as the fireball is about to end. So you're under the effects of Combustion. Rune of Power is automatically under your feet because that's just how it works now. You pop Combustion, Rune of Power drops, okay? And then the fireball ends as the Pyroblast also is queued up, so they both fly off at the same time. And then that generates a hot streak. So now you're able to Pyroblast immediately, right? So as soon as you're able to send off that Pyroblast, you're going to want to hit a Phoenix Flame, and then another Pyroblast, and then Fire Blast, Pyroblast, Phoenix Flame, Pyroblast. And basically you're just alternating. And the goal here is you just want to keep 2 stacks of Infernal Cascade up. You don't want to drop those stacks, and you want to get as many Pyroblasts off as possible. So once again, let's talk about this more, okay? Because I want to make sure you guys understand this. The reason why we can fire 2 Pyroblasts in a row is because Fireball and Pyroblast both crit, generating a hot streak, okay? So after that happens, we alternate between Pyroblast, Fire Blast, or Pyroblast, Phoenix Flames, while maintaining 2 stacks of Infernal Cascade. Keep in mind, if you precast Pyro crit, the first cast that you did, right? The first cast before we cast the Fireball, if that one crit, you're going to need to still get to 2 stacks, right? Because you're only going to do the 1 Fire Blast while you're precasting your Fireball, right? So you're going to need to Fire Blast immediately to get to that 2 stack. So in terms of a sequence, right, here is what it looks like. All right, so we start off with a hard cast Pyroblast on the pull here. And in this demonstration, we're going to have it not crit. So we're going to show what the sequence would look like if you didn't get a crit, essentially. So yeah, beginning with this hard cast Pyroblast before the pull timer. This Fireball goes into a Combustion, Fire Blast, Fire Blast, Pyroblast, which gives us 2 stacks of Infernal Cascade, into another Pyroblast right here. Following this up, we're going to go with a Phoenix Flame, and then a Pyroblast. And then to refresh the Infernal Cascade, we're going to Fire Blast right here, and then Pyroblast again. And then we're going to Phoenix Flame into another Pyroblast. And then to refresh the Infernal Cascade, we're going to Fire Blast again, Pyroblast. And we're going to finish off with a Phoenix Flame into a Pyroblast. So now how far you get in here is going to depend on your haste, and it's going to depend on if you have Lust and Berserking and Power Fusion. There's a whole bunch of other factors, right? But the idea is you're just maintaining your stacks of Infernal Cascade while you're getting as many Pyroblasts off as possible. That's the goal. All right, so this time we're going to show it with the first Pyroblast actually critting, and I'm also going to use the Soul Igniter just to demonstrate this as well. So we're going to go ahead and precast our Pyroblast that we do before combat. And as this is ending, I'm going to go ahead and pop my Trinkets. I'm going to pop Berserking. I'm going to pop the Soul Igniter right here. Cast a Fireball. And then right at the end here, I'm going to Combust, Fire Blast, Pyroblast, Pyroblast into a Fire Blast, Pyroblast to get the 2 stack of Infernal Cascade right there. Into a Phoenix Flame. And going to go ahead and cancel my Soul Igniter there as well. Phoenix Flame, Pyroblast into a Fire Blast, Pyroblast to refresh the stacks of Infernal Cascade. Into another Phoenix Flame, Pyroblast. And then right before Infernal Cascade falls again, we're going to Fire Blast, Pyroblast again. So as you can see, it's the same amount of Pyroblast total in here after the Phoenix Flame Pyroblast that we end with. It's the same amount of Pyroblast as the other sequence that we did before. The only difference is that the first Pyroblast in the sequence, unfortunately, doesn't have the effects of Infernal Cascade. So in a way, it's actually a little bit worse. But generally speaking, this is just because of my specific haste levels and because I'm a troll. And in your case, right, this might be the only way to get to 7 Pyroblast, right? Like you may only be able to get to 6 unless you have a crit on the pull. So it all just depends on like what your haste values are and like what sort of buffs you have. If you're lusting on the pull, if you're not lusting on the pull, if you're a troll, there are a lot of factors here. But for my character specifically, with the amount of haste I have, which is around 22%, and being a troll, in both cases, I end up getting 7 Pyroblasts, so it's actually better for me to do the non-crit opener since it ensures that all of my Pyroblasts get the effects of Infernal Cascade at 2 stacks. Now, keep in mind, Fire Blast actually has an internal cooldown of 0.5 seconds, So if you don't crit in your first Pyroblast and you're queuing up your Fireball and you're ready to, you know, slam your Combustion in your Fireblast, make sure that you do it far out enough, right? You need to be at least like 0.6 seconds out, I would say, just to be safe. Because, you know, you need to Fireblast once, and then that's going to put Fireblast on that 0.5 second cooldown, right? And then you get the second one off right at the last second, okay? And it needs to go off in time for you to queue up that Pyroblast as well. Now, if you're wondering how my macro works, if you've seen it from the other video, the one button macro video, this is the rotation that video uses, okay? Basically, I set it up so that it would just always be the same, right? It would always work just on the pull. And that's why I used the non-crit version, because basically you could just open with this macro, okay? So if you have been looking at the one button macro and you're like trying to understand, like, why is it that I'm hard casting Pyroblast? Why isn't this working? It's probably because you're pressing it either too slow or you aren't pressing it early enough in the cast. And this is also true for if you're like manually doing Combustion. If you're ever wondering like why you can't fire off 2 Pyroblasts in a row, the issue is probably that you're not starting fast enough. Like, don't be afraid to like cut off, you know, a portion of your Combustion in that Fireball cast, that initial cast. Don't be afraid of doing that, okay? Like, it's better if you just like nail the opener and get used to it and like build that muscle memory. You know, it's better to like get that down first and then kind of work your way backwards from there. And then eventually you can hopefully get to a point where, you know, you're consistently able to do that Fireball and then combust like 0.6 seconds before it ends, get your 2 Fireblasts in, and then Pyroblast, right? Like, that's the ideal scenario. Okay, so just work towards that. That is the goal. So yeah, basically whenever we were talking about both of the rotations, you know, they both start with Fireball, Combustion, and then either Fireblast once or twice, and then Pyroblast. But after that, it kind of just repeats, right? There's a little bit of a trend here. So in both cases, you're going to be alternating Pyroblast, Phoenix Flame, Pyroblast, right? Very simple. But obviously keep in mind, if you have a whole bunch of haste, you may not want to just go that route. You may want to weave in a Scorch in there. You may want to do 2 Phoenix Flames in a row. Like, the goal is just get as many Pyroblasts off as possible while using your Fireblasts, all your charges, right? And keeping up your Infernal Cascade. Very, very important that you keep up your Infernal Cascade. Now, while you're doing your Combustion, I recommend that you either jump or strafe. The reason why you want to do this is because it prevents you from accidentally hard casting a Pyroblast, which is going to be a huge damage loss, right? Like, if you don't notice it fast enough and you're just like hard casting a Pyroblast during your you're basically wasting a whole bunch of time, and it's the time during your highest damage, right? Like, it's like you're idling during the cooldown that defines your damage in general. So if you lose a bunch of seconds in your Combustion, I mean, that's it. That's a wrap. Like, your damage is just going to be bad because you didn't use your Combustion right. Like, you just idled during it. So make sure that you are not accidentally hard casting a Pyroblast. This is very, very, very important. But yeah, just, you know, keep in mind, obviously, if you run out of Phoenix Flames, sub and Scorch, right? Not a problem to just throw in a Scorch in there. And especially if you've got like Giga Haste, you might actually need to weave in a couple Scorches because it might end up being a situation where you're just out of procs, right? You're out of Fireblast, you're out of Phoenix Flames, and you got to use some Scorches in there at the very end. Eight Pyroblast in 1 Combustion. This is going to be under the effects of my PvP badge, 2 stacks of Infernal Cascade, Rune of Power, obviously, and you know, Combustion, obviously, as well. If you don't believe me, watch for yourself. So we begin pre-casting this, the first Pyroblast of the fight. We're actually going to cast this a little bit late. The reason why we're going to cast this late is because I want to be able to use my Trinket right before, and we're actually going to go straight into Combustion as if we are doing the non-crit opener here. So I need to make sure that I delay just a smidge so that I don't accidentally pull the boss a little early here. So I'm casting my Pyroblast. Right here, I cast Combustion Fireblast. This is when the boss is actually pulled here. And we are following up with a Fireblast Pyroblast, right? So it's Pyroblast, 2 Fireblasts, and then the Pyroblast, the standard, you know, non-crit opener that you would normally do, okay? Into a second Pyroblast here. Of course, we then go into a Phoenix Flame and then a Pyroblast. So this is our 4th Pyroblast of the fight that we have 2 stacks of Infernal Cascade up, 4 Trinket up, 4 Combustion, Rune of Power, so on, etc. Into a Fireblast Pyroblast to refresh those Infernal Cascade procs. And then we're going to Phoenix Flame into another Pyroblast here. So now if we count them, we've got 6 Pyroblasts that we've done during this Combustion. We look at our stacks here, we still got 2 stacks of Infernal Cascade. We've still got the Gladiator badge for about 3.5 seconds, and Combustion is up for 3.8 seconds. Into a Fireblast Pyroblast. So this makes it our 7th Pyroblast here. And then we're going to finish off with a Phoenix Flame and a Pyroblast. And right here, if we look at the amount of time we have left, we have 0.1 seconds left on our PvP bench. We have 0.3 seconds left on Combustion. Berserking is about to end. We've got 2 stacks of Infernal Cascade, 5 stacks of Fever Incantation. This right here, count them out, 8 Pyroblast in 1 Combustion. Now, you might be asking yourself, why is it that Simcraft doesn't do this, right? Well, it's because it can't really be modeled currently in Simcraft as it exists right now. But if you want to try this out for yourself, you have to be a troll to do this or have some sort of haste buff on the pull. And you need to be able to, basically have enough haste to pull it off, right? So for my character, it's about 22% haste. I don't know if that's like a specific stat weight that you would want to get to. There's no way to really model this in Sims, right? So we don't really know much about it. But all I can tell you is I've been doing this myself, and it feels really, really good in Raid. The timing is definitely something that you have to get very, very familiar with because you're basically, pulling the boss with Fire Blast, right? So the timing is very, very tight. But for me, if I use my trinkets and I start precasting a Pyroblast at 4 seconds, as soon as I see the 4 on my screen, it ends up working pretty well. Just looking at the math, right? Looking at the fact that I've got this trinket up for every single one of these Pyroblasts. I've got 2 stacks of Infernal Cascade up for every single one of these Pyroblasts. Combustion is up for every single one of these Pyroblasts. There's no way that this isn't going to be better than just 7, which is the standard opener. So definitely try this new opener out if you want. And, it might take a little practice to get it down. But I definitely think that this is something that a lot of people are going to want to try out. So this rotation takes a lot of practice in getting it down, but it's very, very important as a Fire Mage. Once again, if you have trouble with this and you're having trouble digesting it and you want kind of an easy way to kind of get used to it, right? Some training wheels. Do not feel ashamed of checking out my 1-button macro and using that. Don't let other people gatekeep you on learning this spec, all right? There's a lot to it. Fire is definitely one of those specs where it's hard to kind of learn the initial setup, right? It's hard to learn how to use your combustion correctly. So do not feel ashamed if you need to use that macro and kind of get yourself going with that. And then ease your way off of it as you learn the spec. It's very, very important that you learn how to combust yourself because it's a little bit, sometimes you have to improv, right? Like sometimes weird things happen and you have to just kind of pick it up on the fly. But just remember that the macro is there to help you out if you want to kind of dissect it and figure it out. Also, if you're using Firestorm, that legendary I was talking about before, where you get a proc and you're able to just mash Pyroblast. Like if you get a Firestorm proc during your combustion, mash Pyroblast, right? If you have 2 targets, you're going to actually mash Flame Strike if you've got Flame Patch as well. But yeah, once Combustion fades, you're going to be casting Rune of Power, and you're going to be casting Shifting Power once the Rune of Power is down. Now, if you're out of range of the target, like you're like 40 yards out, you can just shimmer in as you're casting a rune. If there's some reason why you can't get in range of the target for Shifting Power, then I recommend instead Shifting Power first, and then drop your Rune of Power. It's about DPS neutral either way, but if you aren't in range to hit the target with Shifting Power, I definitely recommend that you do not Rune of Power first in that case. But in most cases, you should be able to get in range with Shimmer. All right, so after we get done with Combustion, then we talk about the normal rotation. So whenever you are outside of your Combustion, you're just going to be casting Fireball until you see a crit. Once you see that crit happen, that heating up pops up, right? You're going to be pressing Fire Blast to get a hot streak, and then you're going to cast Pyroblast. There's actually a slight gain to casting a Fireball into the Pyroblast. So generally speaking, if you're, just kind of free casting, always try and queue up a Fireball, right? And then you can always end up casting that Pyroblast queued up at the end of your Fireball if you want to. But basically, we just do this forever. There isn't much else to it. The only thing you need to worry about here is if once the target is below 30%, if you're spec'd into Searing Touch, which you should be, definitely swap to Scorch instead, because Scorch is just going to get you those guaranteed crits below 30%, and it deals pretty good damage as well. So I definitely recommend running Searing Touch as a talent, just across the board always, and try to snipe them too. Like if you're around a bunch of targets and one target's about to hit 30%, look at that target and start casting a Scorch. And if you can get a Scorch to land right as the target hits, 29.9%, you basically just got a free crit, right? It's like you save time. You could have been casting a Fireball, but instead you casted a Scorch, you got a crit. Basically, it's a free heating up, right? So always be looking for targets to try and snipe Scorches on. And it's a very, very good way to get your damage to go up, actually, especially Mythic Plus. I definitely recommend running this macro setup here. So you're going to want a macro that declares a focus, and then you're going to want a macro that scorches a focus. Both of these macros will be found in the description. What I like to do is have them set to Mouseover. So whenever I'm just, in the dungeon and I'm casting my spells, I'm always looking around. I'm always looking for a target that's about to go below 30%. Because if I can focus that target, I can still attack my main target, but I can do Scorches on the focus target, right? And basically I can amp up my damage. And then I can use those additional hot streaks that I get to drop either more Flame Strikes, or I can use them to focus more damage with Pyroblast. But it's very, very big in terms of like the damage gain you get from Execute. So I highly recommend that you're always looking for targets to Scorch Snipe. So about Shifting Power, basically you want to use Shifting Power on cooldown as long as Combustion Rune of Power on cooldown. This is obviously in single target. Try not to cap out on Phoenix Flame. Try not to cap out on Fire Blast charges. And as you are approaching Combustion, as a general rule, try to have your Phoenix Flames and your Fire Blast ready to go. You want to have at least like 2.5 of each of them as you enter your Combustion. That's going to be ideal for you. If you go into Combustion with less than 2 Fire Blasts, it is not going to be good because you basically don't have anything to generate your Infernal Cascade. Like, and if you can't get Infernal Cascade, you're just missing out on like 25% damage. So you gotta have your Fire Blast going into Combustion. I even recommend if you're going into Combustion, you don't have any Fire Blast available, you might even want to wait, just because it's very important that you have those available. I actually have a weak aura that shows kind of a white outline around my Fire Blast whenever my Combustion's about 30 seconds off cooldown. And if you're interested in that, you know, feel free to download my little UI HUD and just pull that one weak aura out. But it's definitely helped me to kind of keep an eye on when I need to start saving my Fire Blast, because if you don't have Fire Blast for Combustion, you're basically like a fish out of water as a Fire Mage. So make sure you always have those. All right, so let's talk about AoE. AoE is a little bit different. I know I said at the start of this video that you no longer Shifting Power inside of Combustion, but that's actually not true in AoE. So we're going to define AoE for our purposes here as 3 or more targets. If you're ever in a situation where there's 3 more targets in range and you're going to be able to basically cleave all these targets at the same time, what you're going to want to do is replace your Pyroblast with Flame Strike. Now, this is only going to be true if you have Flame Patch, obviously, but anytime that you're in this situation, you should probably have Flame Patch. Okay, so like the perfect way of doing the AoE rotation, which is what Raidbots does, not exactly practical, but I'm still going to cover it. The perfect way of doing it is you hard cast a Flame Strike before the pull. Now, I don't know about you, I've done a lot of Mythic Plus. I don't really think there's a lot of situations where you can just hard cast a Flame Strike before the pull. But anyways, if you're able to, obviously it's worth it to do this. So you hard cast a Flame Strike right before the pull, you pop Combustion right as it's about to finish, and then after this, basically the rotation is Fire Blast, Phoenix Flame, Flame Strike, Fire Blast, Flame Strike, Shifting Power into double Fire Blast again, Flame Strike, and then basically let loose any Phoenix Flame, Fire Blast, Scorches, anything that you have to generate more hot streaks, and then keep using those on Flame Strikes. The idea is you just want to have as many Flame Strikes go off as possible in your Combustion, and obviously you're going to want to be at 2 stacks of Infernal Cascade if possible as well. So if you ever run out of Phoenix Flames, just go ahead and use Scorch. But the reason why we use Shifting Power in AoE is just because to generate a bunch of Flame Strikes, you don't get anything back whenever they cast, right? Like if you cast a Pyroblast in Combustion, you get back a Heating Up. So you don't get any Heating Ups back, right? Like in AoE. This is why Shifting Power is actually still worthwhile to use in AoE. So, you know, more practically, what I would recommend is like as you're running up on the mob, let's say you're actually doing Mythic Plus, so you don't have time to hard cast the Flame Strike, right? As you're running up, I'm running and I'm casting Scorch to kind of get in position, right? And then right before that Scorch ends, I'm going to go ahead and press Combustion, Fire Blast once, drop a Flame Strike, Phoenix Flame, Fire Blast, Flame Strike, Phoenix Flame, Fire Blast, Flame Strike, Shifting Power, right? Fire Blast, Flame Strike, Phoenix Flame, Fire Blast, Flame Strike. This is way, way, way more practical to me, but obviously there are a lot of different ways to do it. Like there is a different way as well. So if you aren't pre-casting the Scorch, you can also just cast Combustion right away, double Fire Blast, Flame Strike, and then do the same rotation. I don't really recommend doing this unless you're just kind of in the situation where you just aren't able to Scorch, right? Because you're going to lose about a second of your Combustion, and you're probably going to lose out on like 1 Flame Strike if you go this route. But honestly, whenever it comes to AoE, it kind of is a little bit of improv, right? Like Mythic Plus is not a set thing. It's not like you're hitting 5 target dummies. They're all just going to stand still and let you do whatever you want to them, right? Like Mythic Plus is a little bit of jazz. Like you have to improv a bit. So I definitely recommend like getting just familiar with the AoE rotation fundamentals, because that's the most important thing, right? Like you just want to keep 2 stacks of Infernal Cascade. You want to get as many Flame Strikes off as possible, and you want to get the most use out of your Combustion possible, right? Like you don't want to be idling during Combustion. As long as you're doing that, you're probably going to do well in AoE. All right, so after Combustion, you're going to be casting Flame Strike, hard casting it at 2 targets. I know this is hard to believe, and people always get stuck on this because they're like confused by this, but it really is worth it. Now, I know that the damage is going to feel really bad, but that's just how it kind of is outside of Combustion, right? You're just going to want to hard cast those Flame Strikes in the position where the mobs are going to be standing still. And then as you get Fire Blast charges, you're going to want to double tap those while you're hard casting Flame Strike and drop them basically in the same spot. Now, if you ever are in a situation where like you can't stand still, maybe it's like volcanic, maybe it's like storming, right? Like there's a reason why you can't just stand still. Then don't just hard cast and interrupt and hard cast and interrupt, right? Like if you're ever hard casting a flame strike and you stop to move, all that time you spent casting that flame strike is basically time that you wasted, right? Like that you're never getting that damage back, okay? So make sure that you're always casting. Like this is the most important thing as a fire mage, is just that you're always casting. So in a lot of situations, you'll see me just kind of throwing fireballs, even though there's like more targets than one. And this is probably because I want to focus the target, and also because I think I might have to move soon, right? But obviously, once any of those targets that you're focusing, once any of them hit 30%, immediately start focus scorching it, because that's now your flame strike generator. The engine is the mob that's below 30%. That is how you generate those flame strikes, and now your damage is turned on, okay? So whenever you're doing AoE and you're hard casting flame strikes, even if you're able to stand still and hard cast, if you see any of those targets go below 30%, start sniping those scorches and using those hot streaks for flame strikes. Okay, so just to cover it again, inside of Combustion, we flame strike at 3 targets. Outside of Combustion, we flame strike at 2 targets. Now, there is one exception to this. If you're inside of Combustion and you're flame patch and you're using Firestorm, then flame strike at 2 targets during the proc. Okay? Pretty easy to understand, but obviously this is just part of the decision making you're going to have to be making on the fly. Definitely get used to it so that you can perform well whenever the situation arises. If you're ever not sure what to do, remember your ABCs. Always be casting, right? This is the most important thing to remember as a caster, because if you are, especially as a fire mage, right? It's not a dot class really. If you're ever just sitting there idling and you're not doing anything, like you're just losing damage. You're never going to get that time back. So you need to make sure that you're always casting. If you're constantly interrupting your own spells, if you're constantly just sitting around and idling, your damage is going to be low. All right, so obviously, if you aren't used to this all, this might seem like a lot, but remember, practice makes perfect. It's very important to get these fundamentals down. And otherwise, thanks for watching. I appreciate you watching this video. If you liked the video, then go ahead and show some love, give it that like, and also subscribe, ring that notification bell if you want to see more of me, and then we'll send more guides your way. But anyways, thank you all for watching the reborn version of the Fire video. If there is anything that changes in this video, as always, I will put it in the comments below. I will put it in the description. I will pin a comment. It's very, very important that you guys are checking the descriptions in the comments. A lot of people came to me about my previous Fire video saying that things were wrong, and I promise you, I know that things are wrong. I just can't fix it, right? Like once it's on YouTube, it's out there. The only thing I can do is create a new video to try and fix those errors and include information in the description and in the comments so that you have an understanding of what changed. So if you're ever checking out one of my videos, always look for my pinned comment down below, and always make sure that you read the description as well. It's very important. But otherwise, thank you all for watching the video. Like and subscribe, and we'll see you in the next one.